In this video, we're going to be discussing CyberPunk 2077 and the reason for it being delayed until September 17th, 2020. And apparently, the reasoning is because of the Xbox One console. Now, I know a lot of people are going to jump on me when I say that because it seems to be there's some conflicting reports that are claiming it's just the Xbox One, but no, it's been mistranslated. It's actually the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. Here's the thing. I'm not trying to make a video right now on this to point out, look at how terrible the Xbox One is. That is absolutely not the purpose of this video. I mean, I guess it's not. It's going to pretty much come off that way. All I'm trying to do here with this video is prove a point that I tried to make previously when we found out through Microsoft that they are going to continue to support the base model Xbox One even after their next generation console launches for at least 1 to 2 years. And I tried to make the point that I don't think this is a good idea because the big reason why a lot of people want to upgrade to these expensive consoles when the next generation starts is because they want to play games that are doing things that just couldn't be done previously. Now, that's not to say that when we see cross-gen games, we're not going to see some things on the newer consoles that wouldn't be possible on the older consoles. But we're not just talking about graphical fidelity here or resolution or visuals, really. We're talking about overall size, scope, and scale. Just what really talented developers, how far can they really push the limit here? And what we're seeing with CyberPunk 2077 is that apparently CD Projekt Red is pushing the absolute limit with these current generation consoles, the base models, to where they're having trouble getting this game running on them, especially the base model Xbox One, because the fact of the matter is this. The base model Xbox One is the least powerful console out on the market right now that you would consider current generation, that people are actually still going out there and buying and that developers are still supporting. And we know that CyberPunk 2077 is going to be a massive game. I think CyberPunk 2077 is one of those games that many would consider a next level type game where when you play it, you expect to experience things that you just haven't experienced before, especially with the amount of time that this game has been in development. And so this is where it presents a very interesting situation. Now, where does this information come from? Apparently there was a Polish podcast done, and there was a Polish insider that goes by the name Boris, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce their last name because I don't want to butcher it, where it says here, speaking in a podcast, which you can watch below, Boris says that the original Xbox One console is not powerful enough to run the game properly, and apparently, CyberPunk 2077 performance on the console is extremely unsatisfactory. Boris's sources confirmed that if this problem with Xbox has not been solved by January 2020, the release date must be postponed. So again, this is where people are saying it's conflicting, where we're reading here that it's just pointing out the Xbox One, but apparently it has to do with both consoles. And I do believe that because, these consoles, the PS4 is more powerful, the base model is more powerful than the base model Xbox One, but I have to imagine, considering how big of a game CyberPunk is, they're both probably struggling, but there's no doubt in my mind that that base model Xbox One is the console that's really possibly holding things back. And so do you see where this is kind of confirming my fears and other people's fears, where when you look at Microsoft, you look at all the first-party studios they have now, potentially all of the talent they have, and how they plan to release more AAA games going forward. It's just a real shame to sit here and think that because there's seemingly a mandate in place where Microsoft is saying to potentially all of their development teams that whatever game you're making, regardless of how ambitious it may be in size, scope, and scale, you need to accommodate for the base model Xbox One. And so it makes me think, well, what would a game look like coming from, say, I don't know, maybe not Ninja Theory, but let's say Playground Games. We know they're working on a fantasy RPG game right now, and it's going to be AAA. What would that game look like if it was released as a exclusive game for the next generation Xbox and did not release on the Xbox One or Xbox One X? You see what I'm saying? I have to imagine there would be some things, potentially, I can't say for certain, but some things that they could probably strive to achieve that they simply wouldn't be able to. The same thing here for CyberPunk 2077. Now, where this conversation gets interesting is I came across a thread on Reset Era where they were talking about this. Somebody started a thread just, relaying the information and starting a discussion here. And so Digital Foundry's John Litterman, I think that's his name, also known as Dark1X, actually came on and he had a few things to say which I thought were really interesting. And it's always worth paying attention to what I believe somebody like him has to say. I'm not saying, Digital Foundry is the be-all, end-all, but they know what they're talking about. They're very, intelligent, and they know the ins and outs of this stuff. And so I pay attention to what they have to say, and when it comes to some things like this. And somebody had said, surely it's just going to look like a Microsoft Paint rendition at wildly varying frames per second. Talking about Cyberpunk 2077, essentially saying that in order for CD Projekt Red to get this game to work on the base model consoles, they're just going to have to scale it down as far as it can possibly go, to the point where it just looks like Microsoft Paint with a terrible frame rate. And what his response is interesting, because he says, well, it's not the visuals that I'm worried about per se, it's everything else. I'm very curious how they're tackling the issue. It's definitely one of the most exciting games for that reason, as it's likely to stress those older machines pretty hard. And on top of that, he responded to somebody else and said, I wouldn't be surprised. I've always wondered how they were going to deliver the experience we've seen at trade shows on a base Xbox One. It just seems insane to me. It's clearly a very ambitious title with a lot of complex near-field detail and interactions. It's one thing to offer a large world, but doing so at the density and detail exhibited here is quite another. See, that's what you guys need to focus on and pay attention to. This is where we are at the absolute borderline of things that can only be done when we are moving forward and leaving the old hardware behind. When he talks about density, detail, right, how it's not just about near field detail, but also interactions, everything happening around you at one time. These are all things that will be under heavy constraint when you're taking into account they have to make all these things work. They just have to work, period, on these older pieces of hardware, on this older console, on this old generation technology, right? This last gen technology. To whereas if they didn't have to worry about that, not only would they be able to probably much more easily achieve it without running into problems, and there wouldn't be a massive delay like there is right now, but they'd probably be able to do things even more so, right? Like, I'm sure that there's just certain things they will naturally have to limit on, say, the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. You know what? Let's not even talk about that. Let's just assume that they, were developing this game on a really high-end PC that could be similar to the specifications we see in these next-generation consoles. If this game was developed as just a next-gen game, it would be really interesting, in my opinion, to see what a team like CD Projekt Red could do, and really push the absolute limit. Like, rather than focusing on pushing these last-gen consoles as far as you can, what could you do with trying to push these new generation consoles as far as they can? You see what I'm saying? The difference in size, scope, and scale, what they would be able to achieve. Now, this isn't so much about Cyberpunk 2077 as it is about my original point, where the difference between the next Xbox and the next PlayStation is pretty clear-cut and pretty simple, in my opinion. And this is where I believe PlayStation, within the first year or two, based off of what Microsoft has said, will in fact have a pretty distinct advantage with their exclusive games. Their development teams, as far as we know, again, it's not fully confirmed. I mean, it's all but confirmed that Sony is going to offer PlayStation 5 only exclusive games, but I just don't want to make it sound like this is literally something they've announced formally, like, hey, these are all the games that are going to be exclusive to just the PS5, but it's more than likely going to happen. And if it does, when it does, it's going to prove, in my opinion, that Sony's going to have a distinct advantage depending, and this is where the little caveat is, depending on what their teams are striving for. Because we have to understand that what this all comes down to is talent and developer vision is what I want to end this with. That's what this all comes down to. When you see a team like CD Projekt Red, they have a specific vision, and it's a very ambitious one. It's very large and very grandiose, and so in order for that to be achieved, it's not only requires a lot of manpower and hard work, obviously, and talent, but they need things to be set up a certain way, and it seems that they are running into a potential serious problem here by maybe, thinking maybe we push things a little bit too far and kind of forgot, because they have to scale, they were developing this clearly on a high-end PC, that we have to make sure this game can run on these base model consoles. The fact that Sony's teams potentially won't have to worry about that is a great thing, in my opinion, because that means potentially over the next 12 to 16 months, whatever games we get from Sony's first-party teams, they won't have to worry about those constraints. And I have to imagine that because of that, we're going to see some things that we just simply would not have been able to see, even if it's something as simple as load times, right? Like, we have to understand, talking about the PlayStation 5's SSD technology, apparently it's going to be incredibly fast, it's going to be cutting edge, and any game that's going to be cross-gen, it's not really going to be able to, at least if I understand this right, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to be able to fully utilize that SSD tech when it has to take into account the older, solid state, or not solid state, but just the old, mechanical hard drives and whatnot. So we're going to have to wait to see, guys. I just had to take some time to talk about this because there's a lot of people going on about it, and in my opinion, based off of what we're hearing in this podcast, and especially what, John from Digital Foundry is saying here, it sounds like they're running into a serious problem, and I think it really just does kind of prove my point that I tried to make not too long ago, saying, look, Sony's going to have a pretty distinct advantage by having exclusive games on the PlayStation 5 and not mandating that every game that their first-party studios develop has to work with the older consoles. So let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. I will be interested to see what you guys have to say. Be sure to leave the video a like if you did enjoy it, or if you agree with what I have to say. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.